a practical contradiction. So just to recap for a little bit, Course Guard explains that an immoral action involves a practical contradiction because it involves sabotaging your own freedom and or other people's freedom. So why is it important to avoid the practical contradiction, or why must we act only on universalizable maxims? Again, I will recapitulate. An immoral action is something that involves a practical contradiction. B, follows a maxim that is not universalizable. A morally permissible action or the right action is something that does not involve a practical contradiction and follows a universalizable maxim. So let's try to answer this question. First, being caught in a practical contradiction means exercising one's own freedom to pursue a subjective goal in a way that undermines your own freedom or others' freedom. So let's go back to the loss of freedom idea. Yes, we are free, but we are not the only ones who are free. We're not the only human beings in the world. And also, the way our freedom works follows a certain logic. When you make a certain choice, that already limits possibilities for your succeeding choices. So if I choose to spend my morning reading a novel, and I have a lot of work to do, what I choose to do in the afternoon and the evening is now limited by what I have chosen, right? So our freedom follows a certain logic, and we're not the only free beings in the world. So a practical contradiction means you pursue a subjective goal. So it's not wrong to pursue a subjective goal. So this is just pursuing your own freedom. What is it that you want? I want to relax. I want to have fun. I want to live my own life. You can have self-referential goals like that. In and of itself, that's not wrong. But when you pursue that in a certain way, you can undermine your own freedom or damage other people's freedom, right? So you can do something that can hurt others, or you can do something, you can use your own freedom so that you hurt or damage other people's freedom, or you can do something that will hurt the freedom of your future self. We can put it that way. So for instance, a person who does not go and educate herself about important issues related to the election and does not carefully scrutinize the statements, behavior, track record, platform of national candidates, especially people who are running for office at the national level, and then kind of votes clumsily on election day, she does not have a lot of options after certain people are elected into power, because now she has to deal with that. And also, you cannot choose properly if you're not well informed, right? So that's the idea. You can do some things that can damage your own freedom and other people's freedom. And another way of saying that is you can commit a practical contradiction. You can self-sabotage, shoot yourself in the foot. And it's important to avoid that because we're trying to, one, cultivate and protect our own autonomy. Two, respect other people's freedom. Okay, so that's why it's important to avoid a practical contradiction. It's self-sabotage. Practical contradiction is self-sabotage. It leads to an undermining of our own autonomy or causing enslavement, right? So it's possible to choose to do something, but to have a problem with this. So I have an example of addiction here. I will talk about the coffee drinking example and also other substances apart from coffee that may be addictive that people take to improve their own performance. It can be energy drinks. It can be things that are a lot worse than energy drinks. The thing is, those things, even coffee itself, and even staying up at night and not sleeping, that has a limit to it. So that if we go over that limit, we end up being enslaved by certain substances, or we become reliant on them, right? So we become dependent. That's what addiction is about. And when we want to preserve our own freedom, we want to be able to pursue certain goals so that our choice to drink coffee in order to stay awake remains there. It's no longer like we need it. We need certain substances in order to function, right? So this is going to, so I'm not saying drinking coffee is immoral, right? The point is that when we make certain choices, we can become dependent on certain things. Sometimes those things are substances that we drink or eat. Sometimes those things are gadgets. Sometimes those things are certain activities, right? So it's self-sabotage. It undermines our own autonomy and leads to enslavement when we're not careful about the pattern of choices that we're making, right? So the maxim idea is not about a one-off choice, but a pattern of choices that you make so that something is a kind of a rule, a general rule of action for you. Now let's talk about the doping example, the athletes who dope to win an athletic competition. The last question in your quiz for module 8 is about the difference between two maxims. One is drink coffee in order to stay awake. The other maxim is dope in order to win an athletic competition, right? So, and I'm going to connect the answer to that quiz to this point here in this slide. Moral agents do something practically irrational. Moral agents do something immoral because of a failure to think things through, a failure to respect other people's autonomy, or both, right? So the chief difference between doping to win an athletic competition and drinking coffee to stay awake, as I indicated in one of the comments, one of the chief differences is transparency and availability. If we have two students who want to do well in class, one of them decides to drink coffee in order to work an extra 1 or 2 hours for a certain day. She may do that, but she's not doing that as a matter of depriving the other student the 1 or 2 hours, right? Or the possibility of drinking coffee. Like drinking coffee is something that's allowed. And besides, also, drinking coffee is something that has limited effectiveness. You cannot abuse it because there's a natural limit to how your body can respond to it. And there's also a natural limit to how much you can benefit from it. Doping to win in an athletic competition depends on secrecy of all other athletes not doping and getting that small edge so that you can be faster or stronger or whatever, right? Whatever the athletic competition involves. So doping always involves concealment, lying, withholding certain things from other people. And it also undermines the goal of athletic competition itself and the goal of the athlete herself. Like if there is an athlete who is trying to win an Olympic gold medal, whether that be a runner or a pole vaulter or a weightlifter, what she's trying to do is test her own limit, be the best version of herself, and at the same time beat all other athletes who are doing the same thing. Now, if she wins only because she did something illegal, she actually sabotaged her own goal. Her goal is to be the best version of herself and to win fairly and cleanly. If she wins only because she doped, then there's a certain sense in which that victory is hollow or even fake, right? So it amounts to self-sabotage, and at the same time, it's a sabotage of other athletes because it deprives them of the opportunity to win fairly because they did not know somebody was cheating, right? Of course, if somebody was cheating, they would be banned and they will not be allowed to compete, much less win, right? So why do people end up doing something immoral? It is because of a failure to think things through, right? There's not going to be like a Kantian police who is going to come and stop you from doing something just because you forgot to do the twin or thought experiment or anything like that. As I mentioned before, Kant said the moral law is something we choose to impose on ourselves. That's the only thing that makes it moral or ethical. It's not compulsive. We are not being forced. So the moral law is something that we must choose to follow, choose to impose on our own actions, rather than something being externally imposed. So avoiding practical contradictions is closely associated with respecting humanity in ourselves and in others. So what's all this business about the technicality, about formulating a maxim, making sure that the maxim has two parts, a something to do and the reason to do it for doing it, right? And then doing the twin or thought experiment. And I'm going to show you the details of how to go about it again when there is a practical contradiction. What's all that about? What's all the technicality about? Well, in the first place, we're trying to avoid immorality. That's the first thing. The second, in this module, we are now going to talk about the goal or the vision of Kantian deontology. Why are they trying to follow only universalizable maxims? It is because of this goal of respecting humanity in everyone at all times. That's the vision. And I'm going to talk more about that vision in this recording. But for now, let's talk about the necessary conditions for rational willing, or what we need to act from goodwill. So recall again that Kant said that the only thing good in the world without limitation is a goodwill. Now, we can only act from goodwill if we are thinking straight, if we are reflective of what we're about to do, if we thought about it before just jumping in, or we thought about what we're going to do instead of just imitating what everybody else is doing, right? So reason is implicated very strongly in acting from goodwill. But usually, we cannot be acting from goodwill out of nowhere or out of nothing. There are certain requirements, or there are certain needs that have to be met, right? So what are they? First is self-development. I've already hinted at this when I spoke about the example of a person who is trying to make the right choice on whom to vote for. So the self-development is, in that example, informing yourself, gathering the kind of information that you need to make an informed choice. So you can only make an informed choice if you bothered to make sure that you're well informed, right? So you can only act from goodwill, you can only think straight, reason properly, if you bothered to build up your reasoning skills, right? So in this sense, building up rationality and trying to be as well informed as possible, self-development, developing ourselves, becomes a moral obligation. If we fail to do this, we can easily end up doing something clumsy so that we hurt other people and ourselves, right? So one of the necessary conditions of rational willing is self-development. The second condition for rational willing is mutual aid. We cannot do everything for ourselves. We need other people's help, and they need our help. So it's also rational to cooperate. So it's also rational to help others become autonomous as they help us in turn to become autonomous ourselves, right? So the humanity formula, the second version or second formulation of the categorical imperative, is something I'll discuss in a minute. We're still in parts of Course Guard's Formula of Universal Law paper, where where we have these two things enumerated as the necessary conditions for rational willing. Korsgaard says, the arguments for self-development and mutual aid will then be that without the development of human talents and powers and the resources of mutual cooperation, the will's effectiveness and freedom would be thwarted. Maybe that would be obvious in the way the world is going right now. So we have the climate crisis. We have an ongoing pandemic with the latest worrying variant in people's minds. We cannot be free about how we're going to live our lives in the next few years unless we actually cooperate in making sure that the climate crisis is addressed, that we go towards 1.5 degrees target, right? And we also develop vaccines and make sure that the distribution is equitable. All that is directed towards self-development and mutual aid so that we maintain our ability to choose. Otherwise, we become enslaved by circumstances, by bad choices that we and other people make, and so on, right? So the main goal of acting from goodwill and being a person of goodwill is that this is the way we abide by the humanity formula. As I've been saying, this is another formulation of the categorical imperative. And you have here a statement, a clean sentence describing the humanity formula, which is actually our topic for this particular week. So here's the humanity formula. So act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. The word merely here is very important because we use other people as means. When you buy food from someone, when you go to the market and buy fruit from the fruit vendor, you are using that person as a provider of food, and he's using you as a provider of his livelihood. He earns money from selling you fruit. But you are not using him merely as means because you both know what's going on. You're both potentially respecting one another's autonomy. So using others as mere means, using other people as mere means is treating them as objects. Not as people. This is the core of immorality according to Kantians, under Kantian deontology. We commit immorality when we treat people as objects, as tools for promoting our personal goals, and we may be doing that by manipulating them, making a false promise to them, withholding information to them, cheating them in the marketplace when buying something, or even in the doping to win. That is also using other people as means, as mere means, where you use them as tools for your own personal selfish gain, right? So let's talk about the humanity formula some more. So the humanity formula is a second categorical imperative. It crucially depends on this idea. This is very important. When we respect other people's autonomy, when we respect other people's humanity, we recognize their capacity to consent. According to Honora O'Neill, so Honora O'Neill is a Kantian scholar, and she wrote this paper that's your required reading for this week, where she discusses Kantian approaches to famine problems. According to Honora O'Neill, we use others as mere means if what we do reflects some maxim to which they could not in principle consent. Right? So consent is the ability of someone to say yes or no to something that you're offering, right? So this can be in the context of a commercial transaction or in the context of a romantic relationship. So there is this famous infographic on consent where consent is supposed to represent, so there's a picture of fries because that's the, how do you call this? The mnemonic. So it's the memory aid. Consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, specific. Right? I will give you links to certain discussions of consent in romantic relationship, especially in sexual matters. But we can also talk about this in the case of commercial transactions. This happens, unfortunately, to farmers in the Philippines all the time, where the people do things they could not, in principle, consent to. It's rather easy to describe. If you have a farmer who has 5 tons of tomatoes, and the tomatoes are close to the stage where it's going to be overripe, and the farmer does not have a means to bring the tomatoes himself to the city where it can be sold at a proper price, a middleman comes in and offers the tomato farmer very low price and says to him, you must sell these sacks of tomatoes to me because it's going to go bad. And if it goes bad, it will be no good to you. It will just rot and you will earn nothing. And then this is used as a tool for manipulating him to agree to a very low selling price. But that's because he doesn't have any option. So even if the farmer says, yes, I agree to sell to this very low price, that is not freely given. Why? Because you're giving him an offer that he can't refuse. The same is true for sexual advances made to someone in a position where she is powerless, maybe because she is in a lower position, younger, or maybe intoxicated, or maybe asleep, or maybe experiencing depression or something like that. So there can be an appearance of consent, but it's not really freely given. Usually it's not informed, and it's also usually not reversible, enthusiastic, or specific, right? So we use others as mere means, tools for our own economic or other satisfaction when we do something that they could not consent to in principle. Like the tomato farmer is my example. We use others as mere means when we withhold crucial information. So there are certain things they don't know about that if they knew about it, they wouldn't agree to something. Or we use violence or other tools of coercion. We use threat. So this can happen if you say, you better go with me to this party or else I won't like you anymore, and I'll tell our friends that you're not a very nice person. So that's coercion, right? You can also have manipulative, and usually this requires extended action, manipulating someone into thinking and feeling a certain way. And there are discussions of this under gaslighting. Again, I'll give you a link to this. I will not discuss this at length in this recording. So the humanity formula tells us why we must be careful with our maxims. We must be careful with our maxims because if we have a maxim that's not universalizable, we violate other people's humanity. The goal is to respect humanity in ourselves and in others so that we can live in a community. And the ideal is to live in a community where everybody's humanity is respected. That's the vision. That's the goal. It's an ideal that we can think of, even if it's not fully realized on Earth yet. Right? So this is a connection between the second categorical imperative, the humanity formula, and the third categorical imperative, the third formulation of the categorical imperative, the kingdom of ends. So on the kingdom of ends, this is the statement of the kingdom of ends. Our moral obligation is to act only on principles which could earn acceptance by a community of fully rational agents, each of whom have an equal share in legislating these principles for their community. So in the first place, humans are autonomous, but they don't live in isolation. And besides, human beings cannot really be meaningfully free in isolation. So human beings live in community. So if we abide by this ethical theory that respects autonomy and humanity, how do people live in community? First of all, as you have in this picture, there's an element of working together to build something, right? So in the kingdom of ends, in the ideal place where everybody's humanity is respected, everybody is always treated as an end in themselves. Nobody is ever treated as mere means. In the kingdom of ends, fully rational and autonomous human beings are one subjects and authors of the laws they follow, meaning a direct democracy, direct legislation. So in that community, people have a say about what kind of policies will be in place. So directly or indirectly, they are the authors of the laws they follow. They have an input on what's going to happen and how their community is going to be run. Right? So people directly participate in crafting the laws they follow. So this is the ideal of democracy. So how can it happen that people in the kingdom of ends are never treated as mere means? One concrete example is that we may have people who are differently abled or disabled. Let's say somebody who has mobility problems is a wheelchair user, right? So that person cannot have mobility in the same way that other people who don't need wheelchairs have mobility. So what do? We design a community and we design rules. We design rules and we design structures so that people who use wheelchairs can also move about. So this meaningfully requires having sidewalks constructed in a certain way, footbridge constructed in a certain way, buildings designed in a certain way, so that people who are coming from different starting points can move around according to what's possible for them. Right? So, and if we have people experiencing mental or physical illness and they cannot fully exercise their autonomy, the kingdom of ends shows us a vision where we try to get rid of the impediments in their autonomy. So that means helping them recover from physical and mental illness so that they can be as autonomous and as much of a human being as they could possibly be. Right? So we are acting in goodwill in the sense that we are helping them to develop and realize their own autonomy. Right? So here in this recording, I've gone through the sweep of the Kantian definition of right action. So the categorical imperative is the core of the theory, but this is more complex than the GHP. It has 3 formulations. Sometimes Kant writes in a more or less confusing way where he talks about the 3 formulations, the formula of universal law, the humanity formula, and the kingdom of ends formulation as like one principle with 3 different ways of stating it, right? But we can talk about 3 formulations that are interconnected and inseparable, right? So now let's go to the practical side of how you apply the theory to cases, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do for the final paper if you choose to focus on this theory, right? Before I proceed, let me just note that the humanity formula is a name for the second categorical imperative, right? So I'm using the humanity formula because it's convenient. Honora O'Neill calls it by another name, but it's the same principle, right? So she calls it the formula of the end in itself. It's the same idea. We should always treat humanity in ourselves and in our others always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means, right? So how do we do that? How do you practically apply that to cases? We follow the following steps, right? So these are the steps that I'm giving you so that you can apply Kantian deontology. This is the first introduction to it. I don't expect you to fully follow this just on first presentation, but this is the first way, this is the first pass rather on the steps, right? So the first thing of interest is that first three steps, 1, 2, 3, including 3.1 and 3.2, is largely about the formula of universal law. The formula of universal law, or the twin earth thought experiment, is closer to the decision procedure part of Kantian deontology. So remember what we saw in consequentialism, that Bale said an ethical theory must have two parts, a definition of right action and decision procedure. That applies to all other ethical theories. Here, what's closer to the decision procedure or the practical part is the twin earth thought experiment, right? Which can only run if you formulate a complete maxim. And then you feed it into the Kantian decision-making machine, if you like, and then you do the twin earth thought experiment. You try to imagine a world where it's normalized, and then you detect if there's a practical contradiction. And then the humanity formula and the kingdom of ends are only here on step 4, because you only consider them as perfectionist ideals to work for, right? And I'll explain why later. And there's a part here that I will not explain yet. We'll go back to this. I'll show you this again later when we talk about cases involving evil and imperfections in nature. We'll do that later. Let's go to the first 3 steps following the dope in order to win maxim. So formulate a complete maxim or set of maxims. I say set of maxims because sometimes a case requires that you formulate more than one maxim. So dope in order to win an athletic competition. That's just one maxim. So it's complete. It has something to do, dope, and the reason for doing that thing. To win an athletic competition, right? So do a twin earth thought experiment so that the formulated maxim is normalized in the imagined world. In the world where it's normalized that athletes dope to win athletic competitions, first, doping is so prevalent, so common in that world, that probably when somebody wins, the assumption is that he or she has been the most successful at doping, in finding some way to cheat the system and gain an advantage through a forbidden technique or a substance that you're not allowed to take. So in that world, the value of winning athletic competitions is actually much lower, or it's actually barely significant. Also, in that world, probably if you want to participate in an athletic competition, you will be forced, quote unquote, forced to dope, because there's no chance of winning unless you participate in this practice. So in that world, it's not even a matter of choice whether you do something like that, right? So is there a practical contradiction? Yes, there is a practical contradiction. In the world of the universalized maxim, the athlete commits a practical contradiction. So what do you do in cases like that? So we are here. So the maxim is forbidden. If that happens, you go back to 1. That means you must formulate another maxim. How do you formulate another maxim? Usually, you keep the goal here is to win an athletic competition, and you choose another means. You choose another strategy. So you don't dope, you do something else. You can train harder. You can try another you can try for another method of being successful. You can try to move up in weight, move down in weight, or something like that, whatever practical thing you can think of, and then you can go and test it again. And then after that, when you get to 3.1, there is no practical contradiction. The action expressed by the maxim is permitted. After that, that's the time you go to number 4. And then you explain how the maxim connects to respecting the humanity of everyone involved, and or you try to explain how it connects to building and moving towards the kingdom of ends. Okay, So that's it for this recording. We'll talk more about this decision-making framework and the humanity formula of Kantian deontology in the next recording.